More than $2 trillion of foreign aid has been transferred from rich countries to poor countries over the past 50 years, and Africa is the biggest recipient. But here's the kicker: foreign aid has failed to deliver the promise of sustainable economic growth and poverty reduction. African governments view aid as a reliable, consistent source of income and believe the flow of foreign aid will continue into the future. Hence, there is no incentive for long-term financial planning or seeking alternatives to fund development within their country. Foreign aid donors have tended to tie aid in three ways. First off, countries receiving aid have to spend it on specific goods and services originating from the donor. Secondly, the donor can reserve the right to pre-select the sector or project that their aid will support. And lastly, aid flows only as long as the recipient country agrees to a set of economic and political policies. These conditions have failed miserably due to the recipient's failure to constrain corruption and bad government. A World Bank study found that as much as 85% of aid were used for purposes other than that for which they were initially intended, which often diverted to unproductive ventures. This might be an unpopular opinion of mine, but poor countries do not need a multi-party democracy, but a decisive, benevolent dictator to push through the reforms required to get the economy moving. Democracy is not the prerequisite for economic growth. It is the economic growth that is the prerequisite for democracy. In the early stages of development, it matters little to a starving African family whether they can vote or not. They may care later, but first of all, they need food for today and the tomorrows to come, and that requires an economy that is growing. One of the main problems with foreign aid is that money set aside for one purpose is easily diverted towards another. Proponents of foreign aid have acknowledged that unconstrained aid flows face the danger of being egregiously consumed rather than invested. This means that aid goes into private pockets instead of the public purse. When this happens, as it often does, no real punishments or sanctions are ever imposed, so more grants mean more grafts. As aid has increased over time, Africa's growth has decreased, tagged along by a higher quantity of poverty. Over the past 30 years, the most aid-dependent countries have exhibited growth rates averaging negative 0.2% per annum. Foreign aid encourages corruption, and more critically, foreign aid supports rent-seeking. Rent-seeking is the use of governmental authority to take and make money without production of wealth. Therefore, a government official with access to aid money set aside for the public welfare takes the money for his own personal use. So why do nations still give foreign aid if foreign aid does not work? Well, for starters, there is a pressure to lend. The World Bank employs 10,000 plus people, the IMF over 2,500, and over 5,000 for other United Nations agencies. This includes the addition of all other employees from other NGOs, which means they are all in the business of aid because their livelihoods depend on it. Secondly, successful lending is often measured entirely by the size of the donor's lending portfolio and not by how much of the aid is used for its intended purpose. Thirdly, any non-dispersed amounts increases the likelihood that their subsequent aid programs will be slashed. Fourthly, there is a view that if donors do not provide aid, the poor would suffer and countries would falter. And lastly, donors fear that if they do not pump money to poor countries, countries receiving the aid would not be able to pay the money they already owe, and in effect, this would affect the donors financing themselves. In conclusion, foreign aid has helped make poor countries poorer and their growth slower. And in reality, the notion that foreign aid can alleviate systematic poverty is regularly being debunked as a perpetuating myth.